You're listening to the Bear in Mind podcast, episode number 60.
A podcast uncovering identity, color, and love, where driving yourself crazy is totally sane and curable. Now your host, T. Bias.
Who doesn't love beginnings? Well, I found out that most people actually don't like beginnings. And so every 10 episodes, I talk about something that I don't like and that now I love. Or I didn't like and now today I love it. But in this episode, I've actually always liked beginnings. So it's a little bit of a trick. And when I was talking about how I love the beginning phase of anything, a new project, learning a new skill, one of my friends was like, well, you know, T, not most people don't love beginnings. They actually don't like it at all. And so I thought, well, that would be a great episode to talk about loving the beginning of something. And so today I'm going to go through 3 reasons why loving beginnings is going to be easier. And I have a little help from a book that I read last year. It's called Lift Like a Girl by Nia Shanks. And I had started strength training a year ago. And she articulated very well a couple things about why the beginnings of anything are kind of fun. So I'm going to reference her book. And then at the end of sharing 3 really good reasons to love beginnings is I'm actually going to talk about my new beginning with the direction of this podcast. In episode 53, I talked about changing the direction of the podcast a little bit, and I'm going to reveal a little bit more of what that means. And so stick around for the end, and I'll briefly cover that. So back to loving beginnings. In the beginning of anything, whether you're beginning to start an exercise routine or start a new way of eating or even learning an instrument, learning a new language, in the beginning phase is when you usually make the quickest progress. And Nia Shanks highlights this in her book. And when I started strength training, it was very true for me. My body, I saw the most change in my body in the first few months of strength training. And to kind of see even more of the changes that I want to see, I'm going to have to kind of push myself a little bit more to get kind of the fast change that I saw in the first few months. And that's true when you think about even changing eating the first few weeks and a couple months into exercising and eating the way you want to. You notice that your body starts to change and you start to feel differently. And there's kind of this quick, almost like instant gratification from it. Even though sometimes it might not feel so great to be kind of in that beginning and not feeling totally kind of uncomfortable. And I also noticed this when I was learning languages is that you start out with not knowing one single word. And in a very short time, in about a month or 2, you can say sentences. You can answer simple questions. And that kind of progress in that short amount of time is a little bit more difficult to see when you're kind of in the middle. And even when you're at an expert level in something, you kind of have to really push yourself further in order to get kind of that same amount of progress. And then still, even then, it won't be even in a short amount of time. So that's understanding that you're going to make the quickest progress in the shortest amount of time in the beginning phase is what is a great reason to start something. And the second reason is that everyone is a beginner. And if you think about it, if you think about anybody that's an expert in something, whether that's Oprah or Maya Angelou or Mozart, he was a beginner. He didn't know how to read music until he learned how to read music. Oprah didn't know how to interview people in amazing ways until she actually interviewed people. And that's the thing, right? When we see people that we admire on television or something like that, we often see them when they're at this expert level. That can be athletes or anyone like that. They've had an enormous amount of success, which warrants them getting that attention. And then we see them at this expert level. We never see them in the struggles or when they were first learning a skill or anything like that, because, no one's kind of not really interested in them at that moment. But they all started at that same point that you're starting at. And that's something that I find very difficult for me to remind myself whenever I start something, is that everyone else that's become an expert, they started as a beginner. And there's that phrase, you got to start somewhere, and that is true for everyone. And it doesn't matter who you are or how famous you are. That is always going to be true. And the third reason to love the beginning stage is that you're more daring. And there's not so much at stake. You're not invested in something, so you're kind of going in with this fresh perspective. And so you have this kind of willingness to fail a little bit there. And there was a lot of thoughts I had in this, and I came up with that you're just more daring in the beginning because you have less influence from people. And a personal example of this is that when I started out podcasting, I knew nothing about starting a podcast. And I noticed that after a year of doing it, I'm influenced by what other podcasters do, what topics they cover. I'm even influenced by the stats that I see about what people are listening to and what they're not listening to. But in the beginning, when no one was kind of like listening or anything like that, I felt more daring. I talked about different things, and I wasn't so concerned with these influences and what people thought. And I wasn't tied down by rules and dogma of, you need to do podcasting this way, or you need to follow these rules in order to get it listened to, and kind of all of these theories and guidelines that you had to follow, because you're so uncomfortable and trying to figure out everything. You kind of can't pay attention at that moment to the noise because you have so many things going on in your head at once that your brain tries to focus on what you need to get done so that you can at least get the thing that you want to get done. And you leave kind of all the stuff that doesn't matter. You kind of leave it off to the side until that new skill that you want to develop becomes more and more automatic. And as things become more and more automatic in your head, then that noise from the outside world and other people's opinions start to influence you. And then, another example of this I saw not just in podcasting, but in learning languages. When I knew 0 words, I needed to just speak. I needed to say words. And I wasn't so focused on all of the things getting exactly the correct pronunciation or the exact word order or the exact grammar. I was just speaking. And then as I started getting further, then obviously I got feedback like, you're not saying it right. No, the verb goes here, the pronoun goes here. And then that noise starts to get in. And then all of a sudden you start to get more self-conscious, like, no, maybe I'm not saying it right. But in the beginning, I noticed that your brain kind of filters that out a lot better than kind of the middle stage whenever you're in something. And this by far is my favorite reason, this kind of daringness that sometimes we don't even realize that it's kind of there. It's kind of hidden, but when we start to do something, there is kind of that, I can't pay attention to what people think, or can't pay attention, I just need to get this done or need to try it out. And it's kind of cool because you tend to have a lot of failure, but then with that, you tend to gain a lot more success with that, and kind of keeping that spirit of daringness throughout your journey and trying to reach a goal is kind of the trick there. That's kind of the more difficult thing to do. And I hope those 3 reasons are good enough reasons for you to go out there and start something new, and I'll wrap them up here again. It's 1, it's where you see the quickest progress in the shortest amount of time. 2, everyone was a beginner because you got to start somewhere. And 3, it's when you are the most daring. And the challenge is to carry that daringness from the beginning stage as you continue your journey. And I'm going to leave you with a quote from the book, Lift Like a Girl by Nia Shanks. Fortunately, though, your health and success aren't defined by the previous version of you. They're defined by the actions you take today. And so with that quote, I'm going to talk to you about the direction of the podcast. And over the past year, I've gone over different topics. And they've all kind of centered around a little bit touching on mental health, but they've been kind of all over the place. And so where I'm going to kind of focus this on, and I had said this in episode 53, is that I wanted to do more of documenting the journey, my journey, and because everyone's got to start somewhere, and you often people kind of share stuff after the fact, and so I'm going to share it while I'm in the trenches, so to speak. I'm going to talk about more about personal health, which means like physical and mental health, and focus on those on topics that touch around that, kind of empowering. It's kind of about empowering myself and you to take a hold of your health and take ownership of that health. Because a lot of times we leave it kind of in the hands of doctors and other experts, and it's more about being an expert in our physical and our own physical and mental health. So I look forward to this new beginning in this podcast, and I'll check back with you next week.
Thanks for listening. Listen for a new episode next Tuesday by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Bye for now.